The outpost of redemption was a place where hope came to die. It wasn't a town, not really. It was a scar on the face of the vast, indifferent prairie, a collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled around a dusty crossroads, held together by cheap whiskey and quiet desperation. For 5 years, it had been the cage Elias Thorne had built for himself. Once a U.S. postal inspector, a man of purpose and conviction, he was now a ghost, a homesteader who wrestled a meager existence from the unforgiving soil. His only companions the ghosts of the man he used to be and the partner he had failed to save. He was in redemption for the bitter necessity of supplies when he saw her. The transaction was taking place in the long, oppressive shadow of the grain elevator, away from the main thoroughfare, a sordid piece of business meant to be kept quiet. A woman, her face a mask of bitter resentment, was arguing with the town's sheriff, a man named Miller whose spine seemed to have long ago dissolved under the weight of compromises. Between them stood a young woman, no more than 20, her hands bound loosely in front of her. She was visibly pregnant, her condition a stark and vulnerable curve beneath her worn calico dress. She stood with a stillness that was not serene, but brittle, as if the slightest breeze might shatter her. "I'm telling you, Sheriff, it's for the best," the older woman Martha was saying, her voice a sharp whining rasp. "She's brought nothing but shame, a girl in her condition, with no husband to name. It's a blight. This is a respectable community." Sheriff Miller, a man whose gut sagged over his gun belt, shifted his weight, avoiding the pregnant girl's eyes. "It ain't legal, Martha. You can't just sell her. It ain't a sale. It's a settlement of debt," Martha shot back. "She owes me for her keep. This man," she gestured vaguely towards Elias, who had stopped in his tracks, an unwilling witness. "He looks like he could use a housekeeper, a strong back. He pays her debt, he takes her on as an indentured worker. It's all legal and proper." Elias felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in his stomach. He recognized the smell of a coerced deal, the stink of a lie dressed up in the thin veil of legality. He had seen it 100 times in his old life. He started to turn away, to retreat back into the comfortable numbness of his self-imposed exile. It was not his fight. He had sworn off fighting for anyone, most of all himself. But then, the girl looked up. Her eyes, a deep, startling blue, swept past the sheriff, past her aunt, and landed on him. There was no plea in them, no desperation. There was something else, something that cut through the layers of cynicism he had wrapped around his heart like armor. It was a flicker of recognition, a silent, impossible question, as if she knew him. He was frozen. The world around him faded to a dull hum. He was thrown back a year to a different dusty street, to the aftermath of a mail coach robbery that had cost him everything. The splintered wood, the smell of gunpowder, the sight of his partner and best friend David lying in the dust, his life bleeding out onto the unforgiving earth. That day, Elias had lost more than a friend. He had lost his honor, his career, his very soul. He had been disgraced, blamed for the robbery he had tried to stop, and had fled into this anonymous life. Martha's sharp voice pulled him back to the present. "Well, mister, what's it to be? You need a woman to cook and clean or not?" Elias looked at the girl again. He saw the faint outline of a silver locket at her throat. A locket of a unique, intricate design, a design David used to describe when he spoke of the only thing of value his family had ever owned. Elias's heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread and dawning, terrible suspicion. Driven by a force he didn't understand, a ghost of the inspector he once was, he stepped forward. "How much is her debt?" he asked, his voice a low, rusty growl. Martha's eyes lit up with greedy relief. Sheriff Miller looked away, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. The deal was struck with a handful of coins, enough to settle a fabricated debt and purchase a human life. Elias untied the girl's hands, his fingers brushing against her skin. She flinched, but did not pull away. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. She hesitated, her gaze darting towards the sheriff, then back to him. "Clara," she whispered. He led her to his wagon in silence. He helped her up, his touch impersonal, his mind a whirlwind of questions he was terrified to ask. The ride to his homestead was a long, silent journey through a landscape that mirrored his own soul, vast, empty, and haunted by the past. His homestead was a lonely outpost, a small, sturdy cabin in a barn that leaned against the wind, a place defined by what was missing rather than what was there. He showed her to a small, spare room at the back of the cabin. "You can stay here," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "There's a lock on the inside. You'll be safe." She nodded, her eyes sweeping the room, and he left her, closing the door behind him. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the dying embers of the fire, the ghosts of his past swirling around him like smoke. He took out the one object he had salvaged from the wreckage of his life, a strange, ornate, and utterly useless key. He had found it clutched in the hand of one of the dead robbers at the mail coach massacre. It was heavy, made of a dark, unfamiliar metal, and its design was like nothing he had ever seen. It was the only clue, the only tangible piece of a puzzle that had destroyed him. For a year, it had been his obsession, his penance, the symbol of his failure. He cleaned it, studied it, as he did every night. And as he sat there, a sound from the back room broke the silence, a soft, muffled cry, a nightmare. He stood, his first instinct to ignore it, to respect the barrier of her closed door. But then he heard it, a name whispered in a torrent of sleepy, terrified grief. "David! Papa! No!" Elias froze, the key suddenly feeling ice cold in his hand. David, the name of his dead partner, the name of the man who was Clara's father. The breath left his body in a rush. This was no coincidence. This was fate, or something darker, reaching out from the past to drag him back into the fire. He walked to her door, his heart pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against his ribs. He did not knock. He pushed the door open. She was sitting bolt upright on the cot, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the small window, her eyes wide with the lingering horror of her dream. He didn't speak. He simply stepped into the room and held out his hand. In his palm, gleaming with a sinister light, lay the key. He didn't have to ask his question. She saw it in his eyes, in the desperate, haunted way he stood before her. "Where did you get the locket?" he asked, his voice shaking with the weight of a year of suppressed grief and 1,000 unanswered questions. His carefully constructed wall of silence had just been breached, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that his life would never be the same. The moonlight that spilled into Clara's small, sparse room was cold and sharp, carving the world into stark shapes of silver and shadow. It illuminated the ornate, mysterious key resting in Elias's palm, making it seem less like a piece of metal and more like a captured shard of darkness. Clara stared at it, then at the haunted, desperate look on the face of the man who was her reluctant savior, her accidental jailer. His question, "Where did you get the locket?" hung in the silent, charged air between them, not as a simple inquiry, but as the turning of a lock on a door that had been sealed for a very long time. Her first instinct, honed by months of running and hiding, was to lie, to feign ignorance, to retreat back into the protective shell of a frightened, bewildered girl. But there was something in his eyes, a shared geography of loss and pain, that disarmed her. She saw not a threat, but a fellow survivor of the same shipwreck. With a trembling hand, she reached up and unclasped the thin silver chain from around her neck. The locket felt heavy, impossibly heavy in her palm. "It was my father's," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He gave it to me the morning of the robbery. He told me to run, to never stop running, and to never let anyone take this from me." She held it out to him. Elias took it, his calloused inspector's fingers, which had once sifted through evidence and examined crime scenes with a detached professionalism, now shaking almost uncontrollably. The locket was of the same strange, dark metal as the key, engraved with a complex, swirling pattern. He found the tiny, hidden clasp, a secret he remembered David bragging about, and opened it. Inside, there was no portrait, no tiny lock of hair. Instead, the polished silver interior was covered in a series of finely, almost invisibly, engraved numbers arranged in a cryptic, circular pattern. Elias's breath caught in his throat. He looked from the numbers in the locket to the key in his other hand. It wasn't a key for a normal, physical lock. He had known that, had suspected it for a year. It was a cipher key, a tool used to decode a sequence of numbers, to turn chaos into order, to unlock a secret, and the numbers, he knew with a gut-wrenching certainty, were in the locket. They were the two halves of a whole, a puzzle stained with his partner's blood, and he, the disgraced inspector, and she, the orphaned daughter, were the unwitting keepers of the pieces. "My God, David," Elias breathed, the name a prayer and a curse. "What did you get yourself into?" Terrified, but sensing a seismic shift in the dynamic between them, Clara found the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her own mind. "Who are you? How did you know my father?" Elias finally looked at her, truly saw her, not as a burden or a complication, but as a living link to the past he could not escape. "He was my partner," Elias said, his voice raw with a grief that was suddenly fresh again. My name is Elias Thorne. I was a U.S. postal inspector. I was with him the day he died. In the quiet, isolated cabin, surrounded by the ghosts of their shared past, the truth finally began to spill out. He told her everything about the ambush, the ferocity of the attack, the professional precision of the robbers who were after something specific in the mail coach's strongbox. He told her how he had been wounded early in the fight, how he had been forced to watch, helpless, as David fought and died. And he told her the worst part, the part that had festered in his soul, how the official investigation, led by men he had once trusted, had twisted the facts, labeled him a coward, and hinted that he was complicit, forcing him into a disgraced resignation to avoid a fraudulent trial. He had fled, not from guilt, but from a system so corrupt it had devoured one of its own. Clara, in turn, told him what little she knew. Her father, a quiet, scholarly man who worked as a cartographer for the expanding railroad, had become increasingly fearful in the weeks before his death. He had been working on a secret project, mapping a new, uncharted territory for a powerful railroad baron. He had spoken in hushed tones of lies on the maps and theft on a grand scale. He had given her the locket, his final desperate act to protect a secret he knew was going to get him killed. They were no longer a wary homesteader and his purchased ward. They were allies, bound by a shared loss and a burning need for justice. Trusting her now, needing to trust someone to anchor himself against the storm of the past, Elias did something he hadn't done since his own wife had died. He walked to the end of the narrow hall, to a door that had remained permanently, stubbornly closed. The air around it was still and cold. He pushed it open. The room within was a nursery. It was a shrine to a hope that had died. A beautifully carved wooden cradle sat in the center, its blankets neatly folded, forever unused. Tiny hand-knitted shoes sat on a shelf. The room was perfectly preserved, a pocket of time frozen in the moment of his greatest personal loss. "My wife, Sarah, and we were expecting a child," Elias said, his voice thick, his back to Clara. "A boy. We lost him before he could draw his first breath." Sarah. She followed him a season later. The grief was too much for her heart. He finally turned, his face a mask of a pain so deep and old it was part of the grain of his skin. "I know what it is to lose a family, Clara. I shut this door and I shut out the world. I thought I could bury the pain." He looked at her swollen belly, a symbol of a new life, a new beginning, in the midst of all this death. "My partner's last legacy, your father's child. I won't fail him. I won't fail you." The shared vulnerability, the bearing of their deepest wounds, created a powerful healing bond between them. The homestead was no longer a place of two separate silences, but of one shared, quiet purpose. But the world outside their isolated valley was not content to leave them in peace. Sheriff Miller, a man whose morality had long been eroded by years of serving his true master's interests, rode out to a clandestine meeting. He reported back to the wealthy, ambitious railroad baron who was staying at the regional office in the next county. He confirmed the impossible, that the disgraced inspector Elias Thorne had somehow, by a 1 in a million chance, taken in the girl. Marcus Thorne, Elias's older brother, listened to the news, a slow, cold smile spreading across his handsome face. He was the architect of their pain, the man who had orchestrated the robbery to steal the original incriminating land deeds that were hidden in the strongbox. He needed the key and the locket to unlock the final secret, the location of the safe deposit box where the evidence was stored. He had been hunting for the girl for a year, and now, fate, in its infinite irony, had delivered both pieces of the puzzle to one vulnerable, isolated location. He realized with a cold, predatory thrill that his long, frustrating search was finally over. He accelerated his plan, sending a group of his most ruthless hired guns, not to attack the homestead. That would be too crude, too messy, but to discreetly surround it, to watch, and to wait for the right moment to strike and reclaim his prize. Unaware of the tightening noose, Elias and Clara dedicated themselves to their task. They worked day and night by the light of an oil lamp, the ornate key and the silver locket resting between them on the rough-hewn table. Using his old inspector's intuition for codes and her fragmented childish memories of her father's work with maps and numbers, they began to piece together the puzzle. The numbers in the locket, they discovered, were not a combination, but a set of coordinates, and the strange, intricate design on the key, when held over a specific railroad survey map that Elias had kept from his old files, revealed a hidden symbol, a cipher. Together, the two pieces didn't open a physical safe. They decoded a location on the map, a specific numbered safe deposit box at the bank in the town of Redemption. As they deciphered the final clue, as the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place, Elias looked across the table at Clara. He saw her tired but determined face, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly, a symbol of new life, of hope, of the continuation of his friend's bloodline. He saw in her a reflection of the family he had lost and the partner he couldn't save. In that moment, his long-dormant, cold quest for revenge transformed into something warmer, something fiercer. It became a protective, paternal vow. He would not fail this family. He would not let David's child be born into a world where men like his brother could steal and murder and win. He would deliver the justice David had been denied, or he would die trying. The inspector was back. The fragile sense of hope that had taken root in the isolated homestead was as tenuous as a spring thaw on a high mountain pass. Elias, his old instincts as an inspector screaming back to life, knew they were being watched. He saw it in the unnatural stillness of the birds, in the way a coyote pack had abruptly changed its nightly route, in a single misplaced boot print he found near the creek bed, the print of a man trying too hard to walk softly. Marcus's men were out there, ghosts in the landscape, a patient, tightening noose. They weren't waiting for Elias and Clara to make a mistake. They were waiting for them to reveal they had solved the puzzle. A direct assault on the homestead would be messy and might risk damaging the locket or the key. No, Marcus was a businessman, a predator who preferred to let his prey walk into a carefully prepared trap. Knowing this, Elias devised a desperate, high-stakes plan. They couldn't stay and wait for the wolves to close in. Their only chance was to make a run for it, to get to the bank in Redemption and retrieve the contents of the safe deposit box before Marcus realized what they were doing. But a straight ride to town would be a suicide mission. They needed a diversion, a believable reason for a reclusive homesteader and his pregnant ward to suddenly break for civilization. "The baby," Elias said, his voice low and urgent as they sat in the dim, pre-dawn light of the cabin. "It's the only thing that makes sense. We'll make it look like your time has come and that I'm making a frantic, unplanned run for the doctor." Clara's hand flew to her belly, a gesture both protective and fearful. The child within was her one true and vulnerable secret. To use it as a gambit, even a necessary one, felt like a violation. But as she looked into Elias's determined steel-gray eyes, she saw the grim necessity of the plan. She nodded, her own fear giving way to a cold resolve that mirrored his. They set out at first light, the wagon careening down the rutted track from the homestead at a reckless, jarring pace. Elias handled the reins with a controlled chaos, pushing the horses hard, creating the perfect illusion of a man driven by panic. Clara, huddled in the back of the wagon amongst a pile of blankets, played her part to perfection, letting out a convincing low moan of pain every so often. It was a desperate performance, a play staged for an unseen audience of killers. The chase began almost immediately. 3 riders emerged from a rocky outcrop a mile from the homestead, their forms dark and menacing against the rising sun. The hunt was on. The ride to town became a desperate, heart-pounding flight through narrow, winding canyons and across wide, exposed plains. Elias's old skills as an army ranger, skills he had tried to bury for years, came roaring back to life. He was no longer a homesteader. He was a tactician. He drove the wagon through a shallow, fast-moving river, obscuring their tracks. He navigated a treacherous series of switchbacks that nearly sent the wagon careening into the gorge below, a route no sane man would take unless his life depended on it. He used his intimate knowledge of the terrain, every rock, every gully, every hidden pass, to outmaneuver and disable their pursuers one by one, not with bullets, but with the land itself. A cleverly triggered rock slide blocked a narrow pass, forcing 2 of the riders to turn back. The third he lost in a dense, confusing maze of hoodoos and canyons, a place where the world turned to stone and shadow. They reached the town of Redemption, battered, bruised, and covered in a thick layer of dust, but they were alive, and they were ahead of the pursuit. The town was just waking up, the main street a quiet stretch of sleeping storefronts. Elias pulled the wagon to a halt in front of the bank, a sturdy brick building that seemed to be the only permanent structure in the transient town. "Wait here," he commanded, his voice tight. "Keep the horses ready." He went inside, the key and the locket clutched in his hand. The bank manager, a small, nervous man, was initially reluctant, but the sight of Elias's old, faded postal inspector's badge, which he had kept hidden for 5 long years, and the sheer, unyielding intensity in his eyes, was enough. He was led to the vault. The safe deposit box was old and heavy. Elias inserted the ornate key, and with the numbers from the locket, he worked the complex dial. There was a satisfying, heavy thunk as the lock released. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was what they had been searching for. It wasn't gold or jewels, it was a stack of papers. The original, untampered land deeds for the entire valley, legally signed over to the families of the natives who had lived there for generations. And beneath them, a single, damning document. A signed, notarized confession from a disgraced railroad official detailing Marcus Thorne's entire criminal enterprise, the fraud, the bribery, the intimidation, and the order to clear the land by any means necessary at Red Creek. David had been gathering the evidence to expose him. But as Elias exited the bank, the papers clutched in his hand, his brief moment of triumph turned to ash in his mouth. They were cornered. The remaining hired guns had circled around and cut them off, and with them, holding a shotgun with a casual, confident ease, stood Sheriff Miller, and stepping out from the shadows of the bank's portico, his expensive suit immaculate, his face a mask of cool, predatory amusement, was the architect of all their pain, Marcus Thorne himself. "Hello, little brother," Marcus said, his voice as smooth and polished as the silver on his saddle. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist playing the hero. It's your most predictable and most pathetic flaw." The ultimate betrayal was revealed. Elias stood face to face with his own blood, the man whose ambition had cost him his partner, his honor, and his soul. Marcus, ever the businessman, saw this not as a family tragedy, but as a final negotiation. He gestured to the papers in Elias's hand. "That all belongs to me now, Elias. David was a sentimental fool who stood in the way of progress. This is how the West is truly won. Not with honor, but with ink and steel and the will to take what is yours." He offered his brother a deal, his voice a silken, poisonous whisper. "Give me the deeds. Give me the girl. She is a loose end that needs to be tied up. And you can have a new life. A fortune. A chance to escape this pathetic, dusty existence. Join me, little brother. Blood is thicker than water, after all." In the final tense standoff, in the middle of the dusty, silent street, Elias looked at his brother's cold, ambitious eyes. He saw not a man, but a void, an emptiness that consumed everything it touched. He then looked back at Clara, who had climbed down from the wagon and now stood behind him, her face pale but resolute. At that moment, a sharp, undeniable pain creased her face. Her hand went to her belly. The baby. Her water had broken. The feigned labor had become terrifyingly real. The child inside her, David's grandchild, chose that exact moment to fight for its own life. It was a fierce, undeniable affirmation of the future, a future Marcus was trying to erase. Elias made his choice. He threw the deeds into the air. "Miller," he roared. As the sheriff and Marcus's men instinctively looked up at the fluttering papers, a distraction for a split second, Elias drew his weapon. The gunfight was brutal, swift, and desperate. Elias, a shield in front of the laboring Clara, fought with the cold precision of a man with nothing left to lose. But the odds were impossible. He was hit, a searing pain in his shoulder, and stumbled to one knee. It was then that the first window of the saloon shattered. A shotgun blast erupted not at Elias, but at one of the hired guns, then another from the general store. The people of Redemption, the silent, intimidated townsfolk who had watched Miller and Croft bleed their town dry, had finally found their courage. Inspired by the stand of the disgraced inspector, they had chosen a side. The fight turned. In the ensuing chaos, Marcus, seeing his victory slipping away, made a final desperate move for the deeds. But Elias, wounded and bleeding, met him. The two brothers, the inspector and the baron, the man of honor and the man of greed, had their final confrontation not with guns but with fists and fury, a brutal, primal fight in the dust. It ended with Elias standing over his defeated brother, the full weight of justice finally delivered. In the aftermath, the truth, as it always does, came out. Marcus Thorne was arrested by the U.S. Marshals, his empire built on lies and blood brought crashing down into the dust from which it came. Elias, his name and honor cleared, was offered his old job back, a chance to pin the inspector's badge back on his chest. He respectfully, quietly, declined. He returned with Clara to the homestead. The story ends months later. The sun is setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the quiet valley. Clara is sitting on the porch swing, holding her newborn son, whom she has named David. Elias stands beside her, his arm resting on the back of the swing. In his hand, he holds the old, ornate key. He looks at it, no longer seeing a symbol of his failure and his obsession, but as the strange, beautiful key that unlocked a second chance, the key that led him back to a family. He walks to the small, unmarked grave of his own lost child, a place he has not visited in years. He kneels, and with a final, quiet prayer, he places the key gently on the earth, a final offering to the ghosts of the past. He then returns to the porch, to the woman and the child who are his future. And for the first time in a very long time, he is at peace. He has finally closed the door, ready to start a new chapter with the family he was always meant to have. At its core, The Inspector's Key is a powerful story about the burdens we carry and the unexpected ways in which our own healing is intrinsically linked to the healing of others. Elias Thorne was a man defined by a physical object, a key. To him, it was a symbol of his greatest failure, a constant, heavy reminder of a promise he couldn't keep and a partner he couldn't save. He locked himself away in a prison of grief and regret, believing that solitude was his penance. He was a man trying to outrun his own shadow, not realizing he was carrying the source of the darkness in his own pocket. Clara, too, was a prisoner of her past. She carried a locket, not as a symbol of failure, but as a dangerous secret, a legacy from her father that made her a fugitive. Both she and Elias were defined by what they carried, isolated by the secrets they were forced to keep. Their story is a profound illustration of the idea that we cannot unlock our own future until we have the courage to confront the locked doors of our past. What is so resonant about their journey is that neither could find the solution alone. Elias had the key, but no combination. Clara had the combination, but no key. Separately, they were incomplete, haunted by a puzzle they couldn't solve. It was only when they had the courage to share their vulnerability, to reveal their broken pieces to each other, that they found the path to redemption. This is a powerful lesson for our own lives. We often try to carry our burdens in silence, believing they are ours alone to bear. But this story suggests that sometimes, the person who holds the missing piece to our own healing is the very person who needs our help the most. Their story also redefines the concept of family. It is not just about blood, as tragically demonstrated by Elias and his brother Marcus. True family is forged in shared purpose, in mutual protection, and in the quiet, unwavering choice to stand by someone when the world has turned its back. Elias didn't just save his partner's daughter. In her, and in the new life she carried, he found a reason to fight again. He found a new family to protect. Ultimately, The Inspector's Key reminds us that justice is not just about punishing the wicked, it's about restoring the future for the innocent. And redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about finding the courage to use its broken keys to unlock a new, more hopeful beginning. And so, the disgraced inspector and the hunted fugitive, two broken halves of a single tragic story, finally found their justice, not in vengeance, but in the brave act of forging a new family and a new future from the ashes of their past. Thank you for joining us on this ride through the heart of the Wild West secrets. If this story of fateful connections, hidden truths, and the long, hard road to redemption resonated with you, then you're in the right place. We are dedicated to unlocking the complex, emotional stories that lie buried beneath the dust of the frontier. To help us continue the search, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates a story with a little mystery and a lot of heart. And if you don't want to miss the next secret we uncover, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Now, it's your turn to be the inspector. Leave a comment below and tell us, what do you think was the most powerful symbol in the story? Elias's key or Clara's locket? We'd love to read your theories. Until our next adventure, may you have the courage to face your own past, and may you be lucky enough to find the person who holds the key to your future. Stay safe out there on the trail.